I think sales is getting more complex because we're dealing with a much more educated buyer. And I think that does make a huge difference. It changes the whole relationship that we have with a person in terms of they don't need us for any data or information.
Hello, Sales Nation, and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman Podcast. On today's show, we have Jill Konrath. And on today's show, we're diving into how we can sell more in less time. And then quite a lot on the topic of sales philosophy, essentially, of how sales was, of maybe it was a numbers game, and now how we need to actually add value if we're going to close deals because the market's commoditized and a whole bunch of other reasons. There's a lot of value in this episode if you're thinking of sales as a career for the next 5-10 years, if you want to have huge success at the end of that period. You can find out more about Jill over at jillkonrath.com. Her book, More Sales, Less Time, is available on Amazon. We'll link to it in our show notes over at salesmanpodcast.com. With all that said, let's jump in to today's show. Hi, Jill, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Hey, it's good to be here finally.
I'm glad to have you on. And yeah, on today's show, we're going to kind of touch on your new book, but we're also going to dive into this idea and this concept of selling more in less time. Clearly, there's multiple angles to that. And clearly, that's everyone's ears just pricked up and everyone's super excited because if you can nail this is a game changer for everyone that's listening. But let me ask you this to frame up the conversation, Jill. Is sales getting more complex, I guess, because of the marketplace, because of the buyers, which we need to deal with? Or are we needlessly making sales more complex through layering on top, like social selling, all this kind of stuff that we're all being bombarded with at the moment?
I think sales is getting more complex because we're dealing with a much more educated buyer. And I think that does make a huge difference. It changes the whole relationship that we have with a person in terms of they don't need us for any data or information, which we used to own. Now they need us to, work with them at a different level and to come at them with more ideas and insights, which requires a depth of knowledge that many salespeople aren't prepared for, a depth of understanding of the customer that too many salespeople don't have a clue about. I mean, all that stuff has always been important, but I think the depth of knowledge and the challenge of working with educated buyers who are severely time constrained and overwhelmed themselves, they're needing us to do things that we've never had to do before. So I think it has changed.
Okay, so this ties in very nicely with this idea of less time. Should we then be spending less time with each potential deal and having more of them because they've done their own education, because they're further down the buying process? Or is that the wrong way of looking at it? Should we focus on fewer accounts and try and shorten the deal time even further?
I think partly it depends on what you're selling and the price point of it and the complexity of the deals and the number of people involved. I don't think you can make any true statement about everything because some people are selling apps for $10 a month or, $1,000 a month, and other people are selling, $1 million systems. So I don't think that there's any one thing. However, I do think that everybody needs more understanding about the buyer, the journey that they're on, who's involved in the decision process, the things that they get hung up on. And the more you know about that, the higher likelihood that you can address things proactively and become a leader and a guide of the sale. And that's what helps move the deal along more than anything. I mean, I honestly think if you ask me, and again, I don't sell, widgets or anything that's low priced. I mean, to me, the more you understand and the more value you can bring, the higher likelihood that you can get a deal and that you can close something. And let me add one other thing too. For years, I've been a big proponent of trigger events. And are you familiar with those are?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if everybody is, but trigger events are things that happen either within a company or external to a company that suddenly change an organization's priorities. And to me, if you're looking at who should I be selling to if I want the shortest possible decision process, you should be looking for organizations that are already going through some sort of change themselves, who are analyzing what they're doing and saying, wow, can we continue with what we have, or should we be looking at something else? And if you get people at that point, they're already open to doing something different, and then things speed along much faster.
So do we, and this is going to sound like a crazy simple question, but I'm going to ask it because there's a lot of depth to this, I think. Do we need to change the way that we sell, the process, the whole paradigm, now that the buyers are buying differently, to sell more in less time versus what perhaps traditionally that we've done of send more emails, use the automation tools, make more cold calls, and just do more of the same crap that barely worked kind of 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think you're answering your own question there, don't you think? Well, I mean, do more of the same old crap. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, if you're doing the same old crap, why would anybody want to talk with you? You have to be more knowledgeable yourself, not just about your product, not in your service, but about your buyer and how they make decisions and what's happening in their organization. And if you can target and go after those companies who have the likelihood of changing now, I mean, that makes all the sense in the world, but it's going to take a little bit more time to prep for it. I mean, I think we're stupid if we're trying to sell, things that require multiple decision makers in an account that takes, 3 to 6 months. I think we're stupid to think more and more and more is better. Just dial and dial, or email and blast them till eternity. I mean, what a waste of time. I mean, what a waste of brain power, and what a waste of everything. I mean, it's disgusting to the people on the other end if they just get more crap all the time. Nobody wants to talk with you. I mean, so why waste your time doing more when doing less and doing it thoughtfully is really what will capture people's attention, open them to talking with you, position you as you want to be positioned as an expert who can bring value. I mean, that's doing less and doing it better.
We are 100% on the same wavelength here, Jill. The whole the podcast is predicated on what you just described, which is amazing. But what do we... let me get some context for the audience here of B2B sales professionals that are listening to this, who are being told to make those calls in the morning, make more of them, that they are being put in front of essentially marketing automation tools that allow you to customize 2 words within an email, and then your boss is telling you to send 500 of these. And clearly there's a difference here between high ticket selling and the lower end of things, where the transactional sales, where that might be acceptable and applicable. So leave that to one side for a second. But I know a whole bunch of medical device companies, for example, in my background, that are being sold on all these prospecting tools that allow them to spam out emails to surgeons when they only need to really spend time with, say, 30 to 40 surgeons on their territory, across the year. That's all they need.
In order to make their quota, right? But instead they're blasting every single one that has an email address, right?
But why is this coming from the top down? What's in it for the organization? Just so we've got context when we go to our boss and our sales manager and say, I want to try something different. It's helpful to understand why these things are happening.
Why are these things? I mean, that it is traditional. That's all I can say. It's like all these people stupidly believe that sales is a numbers game. It's actually never been a numbers game. In truth, it's been a quality game, but everybody doesn't know that. I mean, I can remember when I first started in sales at Xerox, and we had all these metrics that we had to meet in terms of calls per day, cold calls, proposals, et cetera, that we had to do every month. But the reality is all the top sellers made fewer calls and had better ones. I mean, that was the reality. And yet they still drove to, you have to do more and more and more. So there's this like entrenched mentality in people's mind that this is what sales is all about. There's also a whole lot of people who aren't in sales that's what they just think. That's their default setting, is that, we get these dumb salespeople who just, don't know anything. But let me just say, if you are in an organization and that's what they're doing, and your boss is pushing you to make the numbers. The reality is you are not being set up for success. And there are probably other companies out there that you may want to consider looking at. I mean, I actually have an ebook on my website called Avoiding the Nightmare Sales Job. And it's about how to look at companies ahead of time so you don't get in a position like that, because that's stupid. It's a setup for failure. You make more calls, you have more failure every day, and you just get pushed to do more bad behaviors so you can fail more often. Isn't that wonderful? We can fail more often. I think it's stupid.
Yeah, and this probably ties in with the sustainability of doing a sales role for more than 18 months as well, which is clearly a problem for hiring managers. But just on this, Jill, and I don't want to put you on the spot, I'm not expecting you to be quoting numbers at me here, but are there any data, has been any research that shows what we're both alluding to here, both from our gut and anecdotally, that when you narrow down your focus to fewer people, you give them more value, that you end up winning over the long term in sales? Is there anything that backs that up from like empirically?
Not coming out of the major consulting firms who do that kind of stuff, I don't see a lot of that. For the first time ever, I've seen CEB talk about trigger events. Of course, they don't call it trigger events, but their recent research is showing that those salespeople who are following up and targeting companies who are undergoing change as we speak, whether it's market change, customer change, new products that they're coming out with, but the salespeople who are top performers are going after those kind of accounts. For the first time ever, I'm seeing data on that.
Is it a trendy thing to talk about at the moment with account-based selling and account-based everything being plastered over every single sales website out there? Is that why there's now doing research on it, or is it more complex than that?
No idea. CEB just keeps doing research on different things, and they, what's making people tick? What are the best salespeople doing? That is they're a research company, so they just keep doing that, and they have a stable group of organizations that they work with that are members, and that they can actually dig in and do some, really good data analysis that way, as opposed to just wide open surveys for anybody.
Okay, well, I'll link to some of that in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. So, Jill, how do we know? And this might be a self-awareness question that, again, there's no answer to, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. How do we know whether we are just spamming people or just on the cusp of that, versus how do we know when we should narrow down the amount of people that we're giving attention to and that we're trying to add value to? Clearly, the balance point is different for every company, every product, every organization, maybe even the individual as well. But is there a way to suss out real practically for the audience? So they're listening to this on the way to the office, they're listening to this on the way to a sales meeting, perhaps even going to talk about pipelines with a sales manager. Is there a way to narrow some of this down so we can suss out where we are and where we need to be to have that success?
I think that there are a couple things involved. First of all, if you're a new salesperson, you do have to call on more people to have success, because your close ratio on every aspect of your, sale is, everything that you do, you have to make more calls to get a meeting. You have to have more meetings to get a demonstration, whatever the logical next progression is in an organization. So new people do have to do more because their failure rate is higher. But I think what would be a very interesting thing to do is to, rather than having numbers or benchmarks for everybody in the company, but to identify some leading edge benchmarks in terms of, where can you improve? And if you're tracking your metrics at all, and you know how many calls you're making, and you know how many initial calls or initial emails convert to initial meetings, then you have some data to work with. And to me, if everybody can be focusing on how can I improve my own metrics so that I can make fewer calls or I can send fewer emails and have better success. So to me, if you can think about how can I do less to get more and actually start experimenting and trying different things. To me, sales has always been a grand experiment in effectiveness, in terms of what can I do to get better. So here's my email that I'm sending out right now. What could I change? Well, you can change your subject line, you can change your salutation, you can change your first sentence, you can change the length of the email, you can change the font that you're in, you can change all sorts of things. And why aren't we experimenting? Why do we just say, well, this is my email? It's like, well, that's your email today. Why aren't we try something different to see if we can improve our effectiveness and get something that delivers better results? And I think the same thing can be said throughout the entire sales process, that rather than looking at it in grandiose things, we should take it down to the individual level, and we should each be saying, how can I improve my own conversion rates for every single step of the process? Where am I struggling? Where am I losing people? And then what can I do differently? I think it's a real different conversation to have in that, and to even pull entire teams in there and say, let's as a team start experimenting and see if we can come up with different ways to do this. And we'll try it, and we can even have some fun and competition in doing this too. But it's really about tackling sales as an experiment, and let's see what can be improved.
So if we're going through our sales pipeline now, we've got a percentage of, it depends how you're pessimistic or optimistic, of people going through versus people failing to get through that point of the conversion at each step. Clearly there's going to be, if most people have never looked at this data before, there's going to be 1 or 2 points that have a massive drop-off in comparison to the other points. Do these massive drop-offs happen in particular parts of the sales process, when we scale things up and look across an organization?
Sure. I mean, if you take a look at, do they happen in certain parts? I mean, the drop-off at the beginning is huge. I mean, how many emails or phone calls do you have to make to have an initial contact? That's huge. I mean, there's so much that can be done at that point. The failure rate of initial meetings is atrocious. It's atrocious, and we should be saying, what can we do differently in an initial meeting to get different results? I mean, why would we just say, well, I had the meeting, they loved us, nothing happened? I mean, they loved us, nothing happens. That doesn't compute. I mean, if they loved you, they should be saying, how soon can we sign up for this? And when can we get one in our office, or how soon can you get somebody here? But if that's not happening, there's a failure point, and we can identify it and say, what can we do differently? This is an experiment. How can we change things up? And people can be reading, they can be talking to their peers, they can be, watching YouTube videos, they can be listening to podcasts. But why should we just sit and accept that sales is a stagnant process? It's an evolving process. And what we have today is only our best guess right now. And there's always room for significant improvement. I don't think people treat sales like that. I think they just do it. I think they do sales, not treat it as a grand experiment,
Yeah, I agree. I just did a show with John Barrows about the benefits to A/B testing. It's always been in kind of my DNA. The regular audience know this, and that my background is in science and chemistry, and so this kind of go back and forth, and the data collection is deeply entwined in the way that I approach things. And clearly, there's the art and there's the science to sales that we can all kind of like ponder on. But this idea of A/B testing, is this something that we should be doing on, and again, to get super practical, I want the audience to take away like a physical, almost exercise to do from this episode. Is it a spreadsheet that just has open rate versus subject line, and that just goes over the course of a week or two, however many emails that you send, and then you narrow it down again and again and again? Is that how we need to go about things, or do we need sophisticated marketing tools to pull all this together?
Yeah, I mean, sophisticated marketing tools are nice, but you know what? There's so much you can learn on your own if you always go in with an experimental mindset. And you say, I'm going to try this for a while. What results am I getting? Oh, wow. My open rate is higher, or, oh, wow. They said, yeah, let's talk. There's stuff that happens that way, and you can take a note. If you're alert and paying attention, you can even see things that you can do that make a difference. If you talk to your peers and say, what are you doing? What's working? What's not working? We don't have to do it alone. We can have fun with it. We can experiment and try. We just have to stop being serious and trying to be perfect and just move into an experimental mindset all the time.
For sure. And I think another layer to add on top of this, and it will be relevant for some sales professionals, it won't be relevant for others who are thinking short term and are chopping and changing careers. But when you're spamming people, there's only a finite number of people within your space that you can spam. And you tell me, Jill, because I'm sure you get pitched for things all the time. And I do increasingly as the company grows here. But I remember those people's names, and even if I don't reply to them because it was an atrocious spammy email, I won't name the company, but there's a company at the moment that have somehow put me on their email list, Silicon Valley sales tech startup, and they keep emailing me saying, hey, Betty, and blah, 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 and going on about stuff that I've not signed up for. And I'm like, where did Betty come from? So I'm never going to deal with that company ever, because I've also unsubscribed from it, and they're still sending me these emails. So I will never deal with that company ever again. Regardless of product, regardless of whether they come to kind of partner with me on the show and things like that, because there's a good fit there for that. And I've just got this, again, I've got no data on it. I've got this hunch, though, that in 4 or 5 years, people have been in the same industry for a while. They're going to be coming back around to the people they spammed a while ago. And that's no place to start a relationship, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, when I first started in sales too, I grew up. I mean, my sales career was in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and it's a big community, but it's small. And like if you're targeting a certain niche market, you can only go there so often, and they're going to remember who you are at some point. And if you're not doing things right, you're never going to have a conversation. They're going to think that you're a pest, and they don't want to play with you. And to me, it's like if you believe and you operate from the fact that you're in a small world, which I think we all are, it's ridiculous to send out the mass mailings that, spamming that you're talking about. It's like a waste of time. It just turns people off. I really think we would be better served if people would have, like targeted accounts, targeted niche. They would become immersed. They would become the expert, and then they would have conversations with people about how they can help their businesses. I mean, to me, sales, the ultimate goal is unless you're helping somebody, they're not going to buy unless they can, see that their own business will be better. They're not going to put themselves out unless they can figure out how to get decisions through the entire crazy buying process. They're not going to move or stick their neck out because it's painful. So we have to really become more helpers these days in terms of helping people through everything so that they can get to the end result that they want. And that's really what sales boils down to when you ask my perspective.
I think we can just be selfish about this as well. I get these emails every day. We get between 50 and 100 emails a day from the audience who are on the email list and email me directly because they've been listening to the show. And a lot of them is, I'm having to do all this stuff. Will, I get it. I heard your conversation with Jill, and all these fantastic conversations that you're having, and all these experts are telling us to spend more time on individual emails, to take an account-based approach and things like this. But I'm not able to. My boss won't let me. There's process in place. There's all this stuff. And Jill, you kind of alluded to it before of, well, maybe you need to change role, which is one thing.
You need to, I mean, to me, if you're in an environment that sucks, it's not going to get better, and a boss who believes and has this narrow, rigid view of that sales is a numbers game is not going to change. You can spend all your time trying to sell this person on why you should be doing something different. But the reality of it is, it's not going to matter too much. I mean, you're not going to change somebody who's, got this kind of focus on, this is what sales is about. Sales has always been a numbers game. You need to make more. If that person is not talking to you about the quality and the effectiveness of what you're doing and helping you improve, you're in the wrong business. You're not going to be successful. So yes, I tell people to start opening their job search and to find a company that has a track record of success and that, interview the boss and find out, when you're doing the interviews, how they measure success, what they do to help new hires, what they expect of their people. And, I mean, all this is part of picking a job and getting yourself in a place where you have the highest likelihood of being successful. And if you're with somebody who's got those blinders on their eyes, you are not going to have a good chance of changing this person to, help them go, oh, yes, we should make fewer calls, but we should be smarter about it. Doesn't happen.
Let me get your thoughts on this, Jill, and we'll perhaps wrap up with this I think we can go even deeper than all this. I think we can go even more selfish than any of this. And what I mean by that is when you, as an individual, on behalf of representing the company, the product, the service that you're selling, spam someone, that vertical, that industry, those decision makers, and clearly it's all liquid, it's all moving around, there's all trigger events that are causing, and they might come back to you because of a trigger event and all this kind of stuff. But that aside for 1 second, when we're talking about the longer game, if you're going to stay in a vertical, if you're going to become a subject matter expert, if you're going to really crush it, it's your personal brand that's on the line with a lot of this. And what I think people fail to understand, and I think this is going to become more and more prevalent, and things are going to come to light of this in the not too distant future. When you send an email, when you say something on Facebook chat, when you slag someone off internally on an email, that is forever out there. There's no taking it back. It is done. It is gone, and it will come back to bite so many salespeople in the arse. whether it's phone calls, whether it's emails, whether it's texts, all this kind of stuff. You only need your company emails to be leaked. Someone does a search for, a rude word, and you've called the CEO of whatever company that rude word, and that particular email gets pushed out. Whoever's hacked it, they don't care. They're not particularly looking for that. But again, it's your name that's tied with it. And as we put more and more data out there, I hate that term, social selling, but as more and more selling is done on new platforms, perhaps I like to describe it, as opposed to a new way of doing things, it's going to become even more prevalent. So how, with this in the back of my mind, Jill, how important is it to, again, take this one step further and just protect our personal brands at this point?
Well, I think it's crucial. I mean, who are we? We are what we're selling. I mean, we are the product of our whole life, and if people don't see us as a credible resource, what a waste of our talent, I mean, what a waste of our talent. I think it's crucial that we leave places where we don't have a chance of being the good kind of person that we want to be. We go to places and we find careers and jobs where we can blossom, where we can bring our greatest talents to the workplace, where we can shine, where we have a better chance of being successful, where we can help customers when they can say, "Oh, I just loved working with Will. He was so incredibly helpful. Greatest thing on earth." I mean, that's what we want is a chance to have that happen. And when that happens, by the way, then our own self-confidence builds and we get even better at what we do because we're being affirmed in terms of you're doing the right things.
Amazing stuff. Well, with that, Jill, I wrap up every interview with the same question, so I'm going to pitch it to you as well. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give her to help her become better at selling?
I was afraid of failing, and I actually did give myself this advice because it was so crucial and I was so tense. I gave myself 1 year to learn how to sell and be successful. And I think a lot of people put some parameters. I'm going to try it for this long. So I did give myself that time, and I was just like in knots the whole time. And seriously, and when I finally said to myself, Jill, it's not about failure. It's about a valuable learning experience. So you're not going to have any failures anymore. You are simply going to have valuable learning experiences, and everything that goes wrong and bad with you, you're going to figure out what happened and grow from it. So if you're not successful and you're failing, you just haven't figured it out yet. It's not like you can't. You just haven't figured it out yet. So I literally had to give that advice to myself, my younger self, that I wasn't a failure. I just hadn't figured it out yet, and that it was a learning experience. And I just had to dig in and figure out what didn't work and then find out what would.
Amazing. I guess another way of looking at that is that you're taking the power away from anything else that could change that as well. That if you're in control of that process of kind of attempt, fail, and then win. It's not luck. It's not the fact that, it just happens to be the right time. It's because you put that work in up front, right?
Yes. And I gave myself permission to learn. That was so important, and to remove the fact that I could or couldn't be good in sales, it actually made me realize that sales was truly a skill and I could learn it. I just didn't know how yet. And those people over there who were doing well when I was really screwing up, they just had figured it out. I just had to figure it out, I mean, to reframe it like that was freedom for me, because then I never failed. I lost a lot of business. I blew up some big accounts, but I never failed. I just hadn't figured it out yet.
Good. I think that's really empowering for the audience. So I appreciate that, Jill. That's very candid of you to share that experience as well. And with that, tell us a little bit about the book, and then tell us about the website as well, because there's a ton of resources on there for Sales Nation.
Yeah, More Sales, Less Time includes a lot of different things that we didn't talk about today, but it includes a real huge focus on living and selling in a digital world that is just rife with distractions and, that sends us down a rabbit hole all the time. And what can we do to be more productive and get more done and honestly save 1 to 2 hours a day? And that's really what it's about, how to save 1 or 2 hours a day. But then once you save that time and stop being so distracted, to me, the bigger benefit of it is the fact that how can I say this, that it's so what happens if you can get the focus to go ahead and remove the distractions that are causing the fragmentation in your brain, you actually get smarter, you get more creative, you get more strategic, you get more thoughtful, more insightful, more ideas, more creative. And to me, that's the real power in this, because that makes you better at sales. And that's how you actually can, work on improving everything, improving your effectiveness with every aspect of the sales process. So to me, it's like saving time, but then it's freeing up your mind and your thinking to be performing at your optimal level at all times. And you said the website, jillkonrath.com. I got tons of free resources people can go get there.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to both of those in the show notes of this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with that, Jill, I want to thank you for your time, your insights on this, and I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you. Truly my pleasure, Will.